So we spoke yesterday evening about how these meetings are an opportunity for self-exposure, exposing the self to the self, exposing those places in ourselves that may have not seen the light of day for a long time, if at all, that have been hidden in the recesses of the psyche, perhaps because they are too painful, perhaps because there is vulnerability, or there seemed to be some kind of fracture or brokenness, and then there is the attempt to cover up, to protect, to defend, to cushion, by creating a tapestry of beliefs about the self, about your life, your story, about the world. That then become condensed into some kind of limitation from which it's difficult to break out of. In other words, what was once created as a cushion becomes an armoring. And we spoke yesterday about how this can be seen as a coat, a warm winter coat, thick, that we wrap ourselves in as a form of protection against what might be perceived as the harshness of life, the ups and downs, the bumps and bruises. And how this coat, which is initially a protection, is held together by a sometimes complex tapestry of threads, which are the threads of your story. The beliefs, the memories, the thoughts and feelings, the resistances, the defenses. The constructs of what has come to be known as the me, but is really just a surface covering that then becomes a prison, and when seen to be a prison, sparks off the spiritual search for freedom. And how within all those threads that are woven together, sometimes beautifully, sometimes messily, there is a main thread that holds it all together. And when we do work, if you like, on ourselves through different methods and processes, whether that's psychological or spiritual, emotional or physical, then some of those threads loosen up, and the seams of the coat come apart a little, and in that coming apart, the light comes in. And when the light comes in, there is a release of what was once so condensed that held those seams together, and there is a relief. And we call that an opening or an awakening or an emotional release or an insight or a letting go. But unless the main thread that holds it all together is exposed, then there is not full freedom. And that main thread that holds it all together, although it is attached to the personal story, is not the personal story. It's the universal story. It's the universal story of formlessness being born into form, incarnating as a manifestation. And in that there is a core wound of separation. There is a forgetting of the totality of formlessness from which each form is born, and then a getting lost in separation, and the evidence of that separation is the perception of separate forms, things, bodies, other bodies, other life forms, animate objects and inanimate objects, and also thoughts, which are forms, feelings, which are forms, emotions, which are forms, physical sensations, which are forms. And all the beliefs arising from that perception that wrap themselves around how we see, how we think, how we feel, how we act. And that all starts to create this coat that is wrapped around the core truth of who we are. Or should we say what we are? So to expose this main thread that holds it all together is often a journey. It doesn't happen in one fell swoop, although it may do at some point. And that journey is the invitation for exposure. Simply revealing to the self in tender openness that which yearns to be exposed. Because everything that's locked in the darkness, in the shadows, is trapped there. And everything yearns to come into the light, to be seen, to be revealed, to be held, to be allowed. So it's really a gentle allowing, giving ourselves permission to open to that which we could not have been present to when the apparent trauma or hurt or shock or fear occurred in time and space. So really we're just being present to what was avoided. It's not that we're fixing or healing or changing anything that happened in the past. You can't change, you can't heal your wounds in the way that the mind likes to think it can, in a linear way. You can only be present to that which was not fully met and open to at the time. It appeared to happen in the past, but it's still here now. So being present to that now, not the story of it, although that may be part of it, but to the underlying sense, experience of separation that is at the core of all perception of wounding or trauma or shock or loss or pain. When we open to that separation, and acknowledge it and feel it. And stop covering it up. Stop cushioning it. Stop running away from it. Then we fall into that abyss, that void. And in falling into that, we discover the wholeness that is ever present. We discover the wholeness that was never wounded, never broken, never fractured, never separated. And then we see that this form and each form appears in wholeness. It was never separate. There's only the perception, an erroneous belief in separation. But to truly know that, not just as an intellectual idea or a spiritual idea, then the layers or the various threads need to be invited into the light. So these meetings are always an invitation to that. And from that place we see what arises, what emerges. There's no particular direction, there's no agenda. There's no imposing of anything. On the clear seeing of what is here. There's no overlay. And I speak a lot about clear seeing. We do not see the world as it is, but as we believe it to be. So to see how we create an idea of the world. When I say the world, I mean everything that you experience, everything that is in your experience, whether you call it your life or your world, or your relationship, or your work, or your family, or your spiritual journey. All of this is the world as it appears in your experience, and it is not seen clearly. What can be seen, as we have the courage to expose these threads that hold this protective coat together, what can be seen are the different movements of mind, egoic mind, rooted in the separate me, that either push away reality, attempt to distort reality, attempt to improve reality, fix it, upgrade it, make it conform to your wishes and dreams and prayers and imaginations, how you argue with it, fight with it. Barter with it. If I open, what will you give me as a reward? What's the reward for doing the inner work? What's the reward for exposing that which seems so scary? Begging for our prayers to be answered, our hopes for a better life, a better world, a better humanity. Or running away from reality, turning away, shrinking back, playing it safe, staying in the comfort zone. The egoic mind is very good at comfort zone. And that comfort zone is not always bad. Might be seen to be good. But that's not the point. The point is that there is no evolution in that. There is no evolution out of the prison of egoic self. There's only a running around in circles within the prison of that egoic self. It's like the self gets locked into time and space. It becomes localized, and usually it's localized in here somewhere, in the body. Which is the same as saying it's localized in the mind, as an idea of self, a concept of me as a separate being. So sometimes we point to me here, sometimes we point to me here. But you're not located anywhere. If you investigate deeply, if you see clearly, there is no me or self found anywhere. You can't find it in the middle of your head or even the middle of your heart. The truth of the matter is that the self, when all the false layers, all the threads that uphold the sense of a separate me are seen, is known and recognized and experienced as non-localized. It is everywhere. The I is everywhere, in all things at all times. So the self gets freed from time and space. The personal I becomes the I of God, and you are not separate from that. That's what is meant by omnipresent and omniscient, not as some entity outside of you that is all-knowing and all-pervading, but the I in you, the I as you, is no longer trapped by a core belief in separation. And therefore the world and everything in it, existence itself and everything in it, throughout what appears as time and space, is seen not to be outside of you as a separate object and objects, but is seen to arise within you. Because you are not separate from the totality of existence. Existence is only known through you. It doesn't exist independently of the I. So what happens in awakening, when the main thread that holds it all together is exposed, and in that exposure it dissolves, what happens is that the self-identity that was locked into what we call the ego, even though there's no such thing as an ego, it's just a psychological construct, a kind of process, the process of creating this cozy coat. The self-identity that is locked into what we call the ego gets released. It's like a psychological construct that is the glue that keeps us locked into a sense of separate me, gets released, gets dissolved. And when that glue gets dissolved, then the I of your true nature, the I that is not personal, but the very fact of your existence, which is beingness, gets freed to know itself as ever present, which means in everything. Everything that appears in beingness, appears in the I. So in that sense, you are omniscient and omnipresent. Because beingness cannot be separate from anything. Beingness is seen to be the ground, or the groundless ground, from which everything is experienced. And that beingness is not located in different forms. It is in all forms and in the space in between forms. Essentially, we could say silence. Beingness and silence are one and the same.